right, we should be recording at the moment. Um, Let me share my screen. All right, as per usual, I'd like to put this up first so that way I can see the names and call on folks if I get a chance. All right, guys, so we're here on my last presentation for the semester with you guys. And after this, you guys are picking up and taking us through to the end of all of the chapters that we're going to be looking at. In today's chapter, chapter 3 from the Exploring Leadership text, we are going to be looking at the relational leadership model. And as models come and go, this is a model that is not suggested as the end all or be all of leadership models, but rather a model that you should be able to consider in terms of including in your personal development. So it's not something that we expect that you will just wholesale grab, although you could if you so wanted. All right. So we want you to consider this model, and therefore, the rest of the class ready is going to be the rest of the semester. We're going to be going through the elements of this program or this model in more detail, as you'll see in terms of the various chapters that are to follow. All right. So the first thing that the relationship model or the relational leadership model talks about is that its focus point is on leadership as a relationship. And the second element is that leadership is dependent upon context. So those two elements were some of the problems that plagued the early models that existed. So we understand that what we're looking at when we're talking about leadership is the type of relationships we are able to maintain with people around us, either as leaders or as subordinates. It works in both directions. And the context in which we are operating, because when we operate at work, it's a different environment that you should be having in school or in class. And similarly, when you're in a social environment, it'll be a similar type of activity as well. So the context in which your leadership practice is taking place is going to have a lot of impact upon how you go about developing the nature of relationships that you have. You could think about even within your family. Um, because for those of you who are parents, you are leaders in your household, and therefore the nature of your leadership is dependent upon the type of relationship you've developed with those people in your family. And that relationship dictates a lot of what you can and can't do and how you go about doing things. So think about it from that perspective in those three elements that you could think about in the long run. So always the model is going to pay attention to everybody working together to do something. All right. Now, the relational leadership model definition, because again, we also had issues with defining leadership, is a relational and ethical process of people together attempting to accomplish positive change. Now, we met this definition before, um, a few times before, so this shouldn't be uh, anything alien to us, but we want to pay attention to it because it kind of defines where we're going to be going into examining the model. So the model has 5 areas or 5 primary components, and we're going to be examining those components this evening in a fair amount of detail. So it is purposeful and builds commitment towards positive purpose that are inclusive of people and diversity or diverse points of views, empower those involved, is ethical, and recognizes that all 4 of these elements are accomplished by being process oriented. So the leadership model sits on this particular it sits upon this particular components. Purpose is central. Empowerment, inclusivity, ethical behavior, these feed into how we go about, and everything in the model is process oriented. And we'll begin to see that element coming up at the end. We'll deal with process orientation at the end of the the session. All right. The model doesn't seek to look at leadership as it's practiced currently. So, though we are going to find ourselves comparing what takes place around us every from a day-to-day basis, it doesn't it doesn't say that this is what we see happening now, but they're building this model as an inspiration for you to try to move towards a better, more ethical type of activity. And some backstory on this program might actually be a good idea, because this book was generated, or this leadership program in particular was generated out of a need for a change in leadership. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to turn the camera on. Um, a change in leadership behavior that we saw as being necessary coming up in about 2008. What we found was that we were surrounded by very questionable forms of leadership. And the president of the college then at Costat had asked us to develop a leadership and ethics program that could have been delivered for anybody in any of the different programs that were going on, so that students will get an idea of what proper leadership or ethical leadership looks like. And that's how this ended up coming up. Even this book, it was written during that period of time, coming out of disasters like Enron and the whole set of financial collapse that took place in 2008 with the banks and stuff like that. A lot of those things drove this model. The authors kind of were looking at the nature of how leaders behaved, and we still see it to a great extent today. The type of behavior that we talk about from before, that lack of ethical conduct among people in practicing their leadership. All right, so let's start to look at the different elements that bring the model together. So let's start with purpose. If we think about if we think about anything, if you join an organization, or you become a member of an organization, either through employment or through membership, um, one of the first things that you should be aware of is, what is its purpose, what is its function. In essence, these days we talk about what what is the vision and mission statement of the organization. Now, how many of you all are familiar with the vision and mission statement of COSTAT? Let's see. Anybody here? Anybody here?
So I've seen it before, but I can't remember it word for word, but you'll do whole your ability to educate our population quite strongly, and you're all about I know integrity was part of it, something along those lines.
Something along those lines. Okay, so if we go to About Us, about COSTAT, that page here on the main thing, and we go down, this is the history of the college and stuff. You could read up about it. You would see our mission and vision statement is on the very first pages. So this is something that tells us, I don't know if you all can see that. And I'll give you some stories about how we came to this vision and mission statement. Um, but it's part of our institutional profile. It tells people what our vision is to be and how we go about operating. All right, what our functions and purpose are. Now, when you go to any organization outside there, especially in this day and age of of high social media um, and visibility, the purpose of the organization and its vision and direction is something that ought to be very clearly or easily seen. but the function is it helps us to kind of unify our efforts towards a particular goal or objective. So you join let's say you go to work in some sort of company. One of the first things that should be happening is that the persons there should induct new employees into um, the vision and mission statements of the organization so that everybody could get a feel of, okay, we're this is what we're doing and this is what we how we're going to be operating. Now, for those of you who did FYEC 100, you should have come across that as well. But there's a point that the model is saying there is that in a lot of instances, vision organizations need to be vision driven and not position driven. And what's the difference? The difference really has to do with with where the idea comes from. Is it the organization that agreed to a vision, or is it a person that's sitting in the position that's driving the organization? Now, this is important for us to understand. If an organization is position driven, it means that in the absence of that individual, the what the purpose of the organization begins to fall apart. Whereas if it is a socialized vision that the organization has, then there's a greater likelihood that the organization will continue existing and driving towards their vision if it's something that's shared among people, and that's something that we're going to pay attention to in a little more detail moving forward. All right, but purpose gives us that that concept, that idea, understanding the vision of where we're going kind of situation. That's going to be kind of critical for us to look at. All right, so moving forward, we have the knowing, being, doing. Now, we talked about this before. Part of the process of us understanding and developing our leadership is the process of us engaging in in this particular set of activities. We need to get to know ourselves better, and when we talk about that talks about understanding how much we know, being aware of how others see us, and then acting accordingly. And it's going to be a never-ending process of us going through those steps over and over again to broaden our understanding of self. All right. So, um, and one of the things that you should find too, if you are constantly engaged in this form of development, is that your knowledge base is going to change, and often should be changing over time. It should be expanding. Um, but more importantly, some of your values may be changing as well, especially if you're not very familiar with your current set of values. You need to really pay attention to how you behave, especially when things go wrong. Pay attention to what's happening, what you do, how you react, and that will tell you a lot about what your key beliefs are. All right, what people say and what people do, there's sometimes a big disconnect between the two. So it's something for you to pay attention to. And that pattern of influence that they talk about being circular is is that every time you get into that process of getting to know yourself and trying to interpret how other people are seeing you is a never-ending process of circular type development. All right. It's really something that you have to pay attention to and continuously be involved in order to to benefit from that self-development. Okay, those three knowing, being, doing stuff. Palmer likened the knowing, being, doing to heart head practice when he looked at teaching practice. And this is something I found from the text. It kind of struck home for me, and hopefully you all could see the connection here. For me, in my experience, those teachers that knew that is the head element, or the knowing part, that knew their skills but were passionate about what they were doing. They had the heart, um, and encouraged dialogue and communication with students, were probably probably the best teachers that to work with in my experience. And I had some really good teachers coming up, more in my secondary school years than in when I went to university. Although in university I did come across quite a few really good lecturers. But back in my days, our classes were kind of big. um, at least the way we hold classes here in these smaller groupings is not something that really happens a lot in at UWI at my time. And I found that if you don't have all three elements put together, your practice is going to suffer. If you don't have your technical information and you don't have the passion, you're going to find that the experience you engage in is going to be one that is less well, less than best, in that you're going to suffer from a form of, you know, what's the word I want to use, but I'm feeling a bit lost here. um, you're going to be, you know, you're just kind of there for the bear kind of situation, if you understand that meaning. Have any of you all, I should ask this question, have any of you all ever experienced um, really good quality teachers who you've seen their technical skills, knowing their subject matter, and being passionate about the work, and you enjoy the process of working with them? That's their practice element. Have any of you all had that fortunate experience in the past?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Jones, you willing to describe what subject or what area was it that the teacher got involved with you?
So I would say that class, I think it was about customer service.
Uh huh. Customer service fundamentals.
Yeah, I believe so, sir. Was in that lecturer's class before. The name is not coming to mind right now, but she absolutely, you could tell she was passionate about what she was teaching,
Uh huh.
and her ability to be able to answer questions from different perspectives and break things down simply and incorporate real life situations so you could understand.
Mm-hmm.
Like something as simple as you go into the grocery, the type of service they give you, or when you
Right.
answer the phone at work, what type
Correct.
of service you give others. And I like when somebody is able to break it down simple, but also speak on subject matter in an advanced way as well, because it just shows your depth and your understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So I found that to be really great.
Right. So you had that good experience there. Ever had a negative experience, Miss Jones?
Yes, sir.
Uh huh.
Absolutely.
Give us,
When I was
without
in
without
secondary.
mentioning names, for instance. Give us a.
No, it's
This,
not this college. Huh?
no, it doesn't
We see.
matter. We
But
safe. I like that.
it was my maths teacher, sir. I don't know what is be going on with maths teachers. They just know how to traumatize people. But the teacher left before CXE. Like, he left us high and dry, so no lie.
Mm,
And we had to, a lot of us, my case, my
fine.
mom ended up getting me a tutor. So it was a
Right.
crazy situation.
Was that lecturer a new teacher, newish in the college or the school you were going to?
No, he wasn't. He was there all the time, but as we had reverted to online school, he wasn't there much. It was like
It might have been out of
the
his
work,
wheelhouse. Yeah. That
true.
that
The work
conversion
that
into online, a lot of teachers who were good with, the face-to-face element couldn't make that transition very well. That was unfortunate.
that's true. But we
All right.
weren't seeing him in person either, so we got ducked. I don't know what I was.
Oh boy. Uh, so, but it's interesting because I myself I had a similar experience with a math teacher. No, the thing about it was they're not evil people. It's not that they hate what they did. They knew their stuff too. That was the other thing. They're really really knowledgeable, but for some reason or the other they couldn't bring that over to us, and I struggled with that maths teacher as a result. I had a negative connection. I eventually had to do like yourself, find lessons and meet with other teachers outside and get help. It was really touching. Anybody else has any stories along those lines that they're willing to share? If I could call some names here. No? All right. Things just gonna get harder later on. Don't worry. All right. So we're still looking at the knowing people, knowing being doing process that we all have to engage in terms of developing ourselves for leadership. So we recognize that people won't be willing to work with you if they don't see you as being credible. Credibility has to do with authentic knowledge, all right? That people feel, hey, this person know how to do it. So we have to be able to demonstrate our competence with the skill areas that we're talking about. So, like for instance, Ms. Jones talked about the lecture that she experienced, demonstrating her competencies with the information that she was presenting in relation to the customer service management that she was looking at. All right, so there are four sets of leadership skills that are required for you to develop in the knowing area: interpersonal skills, conceptualization skills, technical skills, and tactical skills. Of the four key areas of skills, the ones that is probably the easiest to get are the technical skills. That would be if you, regardless of what profession you're going into, what technical skills you acquire through your study and your qualifications. That by far is probably going to be the easiest. The harder ones to get sorted out are the development of interpersonal skills, which is effective communication, because some of us suck at that. Conceptualization skills really speaks to our creativity. And unfortunately, our education system doesn't quite encourage that a lot. It kind of slaps it away, especially at a very early age when your creativity is probably at its best. A lot of people in formal schools find their creativity being squashed by the rather robotic nature of how school is maintained or how it's run. So conceptualization can also be a problem as well, um, and that could cause some issues for you there. But the one that I remember, that one of the we had a speech once from Professor Ken, not Ken, but Professor Julian, who was one of the key individuals who had set up the UTT, the University of Trinidad and Tobago. He had mentioned, because his area of training and skills, technical skills, was in the area of petroleum engineering, and he talked about the fact that of all the skills that are critical for the development of the human resources in Trinidad and Tobago, it was the development of tactical skills. And tactical skills talks about negotiation and development of better human relations. That's things like working in groups and teams and that type of stuff. And he was right. The technical skills are the easiest to develop. The hardest skills are the ones related to communication and working with other folks. You all here complain about group work. And there's a reason why you do, because group work is not easy. It requires you negotiating and working, collaborating with other people. And it calls upon you to bring your creativity to bear, your communication skills to bear. And those are the skills that although the subject is it says this is a leadership class, um, that it's part of that development that is embedded in any program that you're dealing with, which is one of the reasons why group work is a type of assignment that all, if not the majority of your subject areas will utilize, because this is an inbred skill, a teamwork and team building and group work. Those are two different sets of skills that are really critical for developing your own personal skill levels in terms of developing your knowing, your skill, your processes there. It's really, really an important area. And it's probably the one that requires the most amount of practice, as Professor Julian had indicated. Said that that was the area that the country is most lacking, because you have a lot of people with very highly technical, high technical skills, lots of qualifications and know-how, but they're unable to work with other folks. They're unable to communicate, um, clearly and efficiently and effectively with other folks. They're unable to think creatively with the in relation to the things that they have, and those are the skills that we have to focus on in terms of developing here. The being element is also, as we said, it's knowing what you have as those values. Your You need to understand, as we said before, what are those basic values, ethical values, and morals that you hold. And one of the best ways for you to look at it is to evaluate your behavior when something bad happened to you. I mean, it's not necessarily a nice thing to walk back that memory, but think back at some point in time when things didn't go your way, and look at what you did and how you behaved, and that will tell you a lot about what your basic values are, and it will determine whether or not you need to, do some self-evaluation or further corrections that you might want to be thinking of in terms of that. All right, so that's something that's really important, because that is going to be a really key part, because it's all well and good when things are going nicely, but when things go wrong and your true behavior, your true character emerges, it may not be something that other people want to work with or be around. Okay? And of course, putting all those things into action means, really trying to, the doing part, put it into practice. And when you start to put those things into practice, hopefully it's something that will work in terms of getting your leadership practice in order. All right. Um, we have something that happens here with the doing part too, and it talks about a fixation on perfection. Now, some of us who suffer from OCD, for example, have this fixation on perfection. We can't do things if we don't have everything ready, if it's not perfect. And what happens with organizations that or leaders that get fixated on perfection, it leads to stagnation of an organization, because what ends up happening is you end up doing nothing, because you're looking for the perfect time, the perfect set of individuals, the perfect set of resources being available, when the reality is that you're never going to have everything all lined up in place. And it's interesting. I worked in an organization where we had a leader who was, who wouldn't do anything unless everything was in place. And then eventually that leader kind of went out, and another leader came in, who was, I guess his weakness was not a fixation on perfection, but was a bit hasty. And in fact, so we would be going off and doing all these fantastic things, and with, don't worry, we'll find the money somewhere to get it done kind of situation. It was kind of like, for want of a better word, kind of half-assing it all over the place, and it felt kind of messy doing it that way. But interestingly enough, it led to one of the greatest growth periods within the organization that I experienced at that point in time. And it showed me the difference between the leaders who were action driven and were willing to take risks, and that was the important thing. And when you're willing to take risks, you also have to be willing to make mistakes, and that's another element here. Because when you have a leader who's looking for perfection, it means that leader is not going to tolerate making errors in themselves as well as with others. So that then tells us that thinking is going to trickle down to the rest of the organization, where nobody's going to want to try something and make a mess of it. And that's truly something that holds us back. If you think about it, We're never going to ever learn anything without making some form of failure, or having some form of problems. We didn't arrive at being the person that we are today overnight. It wasn't that we just boop drop just like that. It don't work that way. We have to go through the growth process, and for a leader to want to think that an organization, especially a complex organization, a large organization, will be able to get the right mix of resources and execute in perfection from the very first time is impossible. What you need to do is you do the exercise, you evaluate what took place. Errors were made, yes, but you compensate and you work around them, and then you try to make improvements. That's the nature of life. But if you're the leader who's OCD in nature and um, would nail somebody to the wall when something goes wrong, then what type of environment are you going to create in your organization with that type of attitude? Has anybody ever experienced that type of individual, or working with that individual, or worse yet, are you that type of individual? Any, anybody willing to confess their perfection? Nobody? I doubt you.
Excuse me, sir.
Yep.
When you're working in the kitchen, you can't half-ass things.
Of
If
course you
when
can.
an order come, no when an order comes in and everybody the team comes together, everybody have to work the station
That's
for
correct.
everything
I
to go out.
know.
So
That's the
because when you
way.
go Hyatt and Hilton and all those
Right.
places, they
Right.
expect a certain standard. And if
Correct.
somebody comes in who doesn't care or just
Uh huh.
get in because of a friend, they will
Uh
not
huh.
last long.
But isn't there a time in the restaurant um, that there is experimentation that takes place?
Yes, but not during rush hour.
No, no, no. We're not talking about that. That
Yes.
means no. What you're doing there is you're using your other times to practice, to make mistakes and get it right. Correct?
Yes, yes,
Like
you
if you're
do.
doing a lunch for the staff, let's say the staff has to eat, right? So you all
Yes, the
do
staff cooked separate.
right. But the idea is that in that right. So Candice, have you ever presented a dish to your chef?
And he threw it in the garbage, yes.
Yeah, right. But that is my point. But did he taste it?
No, he looked at it and said it looks disgusting, like somebody threw up all over the plate and then he just flung it.
Oh my good lord! All right. But what did you learn from that? I don't know. Maybe you did.
That I am a strong-willed person and I can do things better.
So what were you able to do with the same dish that he threw in the dustbin? That what
I
was
did it
what
over.
what was the dish that you made anyway?
It was a simple
A
skewer
who?
dish,
Skewer
skewer,
dish. All right.
yeah, skewer. And
And
I had to present it in such a way that I think he wanted 150 skewers to fit in one plate or something like that.
uh-huh.
And I don't know why he wasted all that food, but I was now learning it was my first year.
All right. Okay.
And he said he would turn me into a diamond by putting me under pressure.
True. That's
Yeah.
one technique of doing it, but rather than doing it in such a harsh manner, maybe he could have utilized a different technique. But again, that's the technique he used, correct?
Yes, yes.
Oh boy, and I've noticed that myself because interestingly enough, Candace, I did catering or worked with a catering company, so I have the thing um, when you're dealing with some chefs. Um, I worked with a chef. We were doing a barbecue, so it was a rush time, right, Candace?
Yes.
So we were doing a barbecue that was time sensitive, and this man was trying to get this perfect sauce, and we had to start serving at 4. 3 o'clock, these coals are even on yet. And you know how hard it is to get coals to start.
Yes.
Um, this man there playing in the kitchen, mixing this thing over and over again, throwing out this and starting over. We had to go and buy more material for him. So again, the context of work, and it was a charity we were doing, right? A charity barbecue. So we were trying to bring um, as many people together to volunteer time. So this chef came and volunteered his time, but man, his perfection thing created a lot of difficulties for us because it put us under a lot of pressure as a result of that. But Candice, I really do like that thing you talked about there. That was it brings back memories of because my nephew's a chef in London and he talked about some nonsense like that before. And I'll give him that story and tell him you get stuff through out. And you in the Hyatt,
No, I had a two stroke, so I had to leave cooking.
right? No, but that was in the Hyatt.
No, this was with Pesh Patisserie.
Okay, right, okay. But it's a really interesting. It reminds me of what we see on or what I've seen on
On TV,
Gordon
yes.
Ramsay. Yeah,
Yes. You have to say yes, chef, no chef.
yeah. Yeah, I know. I know about that. Okay, cool. That was an interesting story. Interesting. All right, so if you're in a situation or in a leadership position and you have to promote people in the organization learning just like yourself, the best way for you to promote or create an environment of constant learning is through your own learning by helping others to learn. Ridiculing them is not necessarily a good way to do that. By shaping and contributing to the culture that promotes learning, that means creating an environment in which learning is something that's valued, and that's a critical element that we have to pay attention to across the board. That has some problems that we have to look at. All right, so coming back to the first element of relational leadership, it's purposeful. So we talked about this initially. Um, if you're in an organization and you're all just meeting for no purpose or no function, you're all just getting together. It's like a bunch of friends getting together with no set agenda for to do anything. That's just a line. You're just there to drink beer, have fun, talk about the old days and that kind of stuff. But when you start to get together in organizations, it needs to have some sort of purpose. And the purpose that we're talking about here is something that we get together to make the world better around us. So that's the two elements of the function or the vision of the organization. It's important that we have a situation where the individuals are coming together for for a purpose that is seen to be noble in nature. So that's the same thing we want to talk about in terms of that. So that's the function of purpose. So once you join an organization and the organization is the function or the purpose of the organization or the vision of the organization is something you feel strongly about, then you're likely to give all and more towards that organization in terms of achieving those goals. It's important, therefore, that when you are joining an organization, that you become involved and intimately aware of the vision of the organization. Now, we talked about the two types of vision or purpose of or organization: personalized vision versus socialized vision. So, a personalized vision refers to a person, usually within the organization with the legitimate authority, whose dream is driving the organization. That means that the organization runs on this person's vision and objectives. Now, a lot of great organizations have started like this, where somebody in the organization has a vision of where they see themselves in the future, and that organization is then moved forward based upon that particular objective or vision of the participant or the individual. Other people who join the organization may not necessarily share that vision because the person doesn't really work towards um, involving them in that process. As opposed to a personalized vision, you have socialized visions, which is a vision created among the members of the organization. So it's created in by involving all members that are making up the organization. Now, I did say to you that I will give you some backstory on this. So these are the vision and mission statements created for COSTAT. And Interestingly, as you'd see here, um, in terms of COSTAT was established as a multi-campus community through the amalgamation of 7 different tertiary education. So actually 8. And that's John Donaldson Technical Institute, San Fernando, the GVC, which is the Government Vocational Center in Point Fortin, the Eastern Caribbean Institute of Agriculture and Forestry, ECIAF, Joint Services Staff College. That's where they train police. MIC, which is the Metals Industries Company Limited, and NEHUST, which included the College of Nursing, College of Health Sciences, School of Languages, Business Management Division, and so on. I came from John Donaldson. In 1997, I joined a small finance committee group to work with representatives from all of these. There was one other organization that was supposed to be part of the eighth individual, which was Cipriani College. Don't know if you all are familiar with Cipriani. All right, they were also part of the thrust. And the idea was in the late 1990s, the participation rate of students moving from O levels into tertiary education was about less than 5%. So less than 5% of the population of Trinidad and Tobago went on to do higher degrees, tertiary level degrees. At John Donaldson, for example, I was involved with the business management technicians program, the secretarial, what we call the executive secretaries program. Those programs had limited space. We'd have 25 spaces available every year for full-time students and 25 available for part-time. Eventually, we were able to up it to 30. So that was, I remember when we had applications to come and do this program, we would have 500 to 600 people interviewing for a position, for one of those positions in the college, in the university, in John Day at the time. And what it meant, therefore, is that we weren't able to take at any point in time 30 students out of 500. That's a huge failure rate. And the failure rate for the program itself, which was the NEC technician program, was quite high as well, because the way it worked is that you had to pass all, I think it was 8 elements, and if you failed any one element, you failed the entire program. So the failure rate was very high as well. So San Fernando and John Lee and GVC, we all use the same governing examination body, which is NEC. ECIAF was a different. Joint Services was working for preparing police, primarily police, Joint Services, as well as some of their other programs for advanced studies and promotion within the service. MIC never came on board. They never attended any meetings because they were working with a company out of Germany, and then created their big shift there, and they ran a lot of the other programs. And of course, NEHUS was kind of like the linchpin organization then, because they had so much different areas of training. So in order for us to develop back then, we never called it COSTAT, we called it the National Community College of Trinidad and Tobago. We were able to, or we went through an exercise from, well, they're saying from 1998, but I'll tell you, since 1997, we were working together with this community college implementation team. I was with the FIT team, which is the finance integration team. We went through that whole process to try and bring all 7 of those organizations together. And in order to develop this mission and vision statement, each institution had to go to all of its staff members and get their suggestions, engage in forum discussions with all levels of the organizations in order to develop a vision and mission statement. So we actually had to run classes in what is a vision statement and what's a mission statement, because people were asking, well, what's the difference between a vision and a mission? And I always remember the easiest definition that you get is a vision is where you want to go, where your destination, and the mission is how you're going to get there, is what you're going to do to get there. So that was some of the things that we had to go through, and it took us roughly about a year to get that done. In the meantime, when we were working on this, there was a change in government, there was a change in policy in terms of gate and so on. And what ended up happening is that UTT came on board, and a lot of these institutions that were previously part of the whole thrust moving forward, divisions out of John Donaldson Technical, San Fernando Tech, GVC, some of Eastern, well, all of ECIAF and no, Joint Services, and the MIC, they went off on separate journeys into the UTT campuses or the University of Trinidad and Tobago. And the business sections from John D, San Fernando, and Nehus, we all got together to make up the Department of Business Management in Costat. So there was a lot of painful things that took place because in effect, all of these institutions failed to cease to exist after a period of time when those two institutions came on, Costat and UTT. And that's how we started back then in 2000. Because in the year 2000, the what's the word I want to use? The government harmonized the legislation that governs the College of Costat. And if you ever look at the act that sets up Costat, you'd see that it was set up in the year 2000. But we were working from since before, a long time. So it took a while. By 2007, we had that whole harmonization process that took place. It really didn't get kicking until a good while afterwards. But it took us a long time to get that together. But that's a lot of work. And as a result of being part of the process of developing the mission and vision statements, it brought a lot of, what's the word I want to use? A lot of commitment from people being included in that process who were willing to drive the organization forward. So some of the first set of people who started to work in COSTAT were members of the different communities that contributed to the development of that socialized vision. And that socialized vision helped to create that shared community going together. I mean, still to this day, I still feel very happy that I made the decision to leave Ministry of Education and, well, what was my substantive post in John Donaldson Technical, and went on to become a member of the staff and faculty here at COSTAT. Now, there's a difference. I will leave. In fact, I'm approaching soon enough my retirement, and I will leave the organization, but I will leave a legacy of things behind, of programs that I've developed and of courses that I've taught, of students that I've interacted with, who will eventually, in turn, some of you will come back into the organization and become part of the thing. But what is important is that as new people come into the organization, we we should have a sort of rebuilding or induction of the new people coming in to make sure that they're also socialized into the vision of the organization, so that they become believers too, or members of the cult, so to speak. Now, some of you all may be familiar with organizations that are developed from a personalized position. I'll give you an example. What happens with organizations that are developed from personalized vision? In the absence of that individual, the organization falters and in a lot of instances fail. So an example I gave in another class previously this week. You all are familiar with Bagwan Singh, the hardware stores around Trinidad? Anybody? All of you all should be familiar with Bhagwan Singhs.
Of course, sir, of course.
All right. So Mrs. Bhagwan Singh died, Helen. She was the matriarch. And the hardware was something that she really developed. And you have these multiple branches that exist all around Trinidad. You have Port of Spain, you have San Fernando, you have Chagonas. I think you have two branches, one in Marabella as well, and of course the one in Piarco. And when she died, apparently what took place, because it was shocking, because I found out about it soon after she died, each branch is now cut away from the other branches. They're no longer a group of companies or group of organizations working together, but each family member has taken over one, and they operate independent of each other under the name. Well, they actually had to make some changes to their names. That doesn't bode well for an organization that has that kind of span, if you follow, and it's probably because the driving force behind the vision of Bhagwan Singh's Limited is gone, and other people don't share that particular vision and mission statement that she created, and that is the problem with personalized vision. Another company that suffered from a similar type of activity was a company you might not even be aware of, um, the Amar group of companies. Anybody ever knows about them? Ever heard about them? The
Yes,
Amar group.
sir.
Yeah.
Sounds familiar. That was very long time ago.
It was a long time ago. In fact, Amar Limited was synonymous with Toyota vehicles. They were the company that held the franchise for the sale and service of all Toyota vehicles here in Trinidad. And when the father who had set it up died, his sons were unable to kind of control things. But by that time, of course, Amar Limited had become Amar Group of companies, because they started to diversify into a whole set of different areas, food and sub-services, and one of the brothers took the company out into music and film production. But when the father died, the personalized vision that he had was unsustainable because they didn't all share the same vision. Eventually, Toyota came in and took away the franchise from, that's Toyota Japan came and took the franchise away from Amar because they weren't paying enough attention to the business, resulting in them losing that franchise, which was the cornerstone of the organization. And again, because the organization was built upon a personal vision of the father, it couldn't survive the test over the time frame because it lacked the support and shared vision that a socialized vision would have carried across with, which is one of the reasons why a lot of larger organizations that have gone through the process of socializing their vision and vision statements and stuff so on have stood that test of time and exist for very long periods of time. We're seeing the difference there because it's one of the driving forces behind the 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 organization. All right. Anybody here belongs to an organization that is, pretty old, has been around a long time? Anybody?
At least give a period now, sir.
Let's say 20 years.
I'm working where I work. I'm working there for the past 22 years.
Right. So that means that at least they've been in operation since then. But have they been, are they not older than you? Were they not in existence before you joined them?
Yes.
Right. Anybody else?
The organization that I work, they've been around 100 years.
Which organization is that?
That's William H. Scott.
Yes, that's true. That's correct. By the way, so what company was it that you're working for at least 20 years?
I really prefer not to say,
Okay,
sir.
all right, don't say, don't say. I figure I know who it is, but don't say. Anybody
Please.
else? Anybody else? No. So we have the only working people here. All right, okay. And well, I work with Costat, and Costat is 25 years this year. Again, operating with the same vision and mission statement. Interestingly enough, by the year 2022, 2020 actually, the goals and objectives that we had set from a national point of view in terms of we were looking to get to move the country from 5% participation rates in tertiary education. From 5%, we were moving it. We tried to move it from 5% to more than 50%. Actually, right now, it's at almost 75% participation rate, and primarily local. And of course, what would have been able to facilitate that was one, the creation of all of these tertiary level organizations, UTT, COSTAT, the broadening of the capacity of UWI, because they also had very limited space, and of course, GATE, the government scholarship programs that were utilized to assist people to afford education, because that was part of the problem. Um, the year I ended my studies in 1989 at the University of the West Indies was the last year. Well, it wasn't even the last year, because in the last year of my time there, 1988 actually, the government ended free education at UWI, and we were required to pay fees. And I remember a lot of my friends and I um, had had a hard time coming up with, because it was all one-time fees. And back then, the fees were a little problematic in getting. I remember my mom had to mortgage the house to pay my tuition. It was interesting for the last year of my studies there. I mean, if that were the case, a lot of us could not have afforded to go to university, which is what ended up happening. With the removal of free education up at the University of the West Indies, the amount of people moving into tertiary education fell dramatically because of the cost factor. What was also happening in the tertiary education environment was that a lot of private universities or private institutions were opening up organizations, basically these little schools under their house, and offering degrees to people and training and that kind of stuff. And that actually had created a problem, because a lot of these programs were not accredited. They were being offered from universities of questionable accreditation in the United States or in various parts of the world. So that also led to the creation of the accreditation committee of Trinidad and Tobago, because now you had to to pay attention to, well, the government is trying to say to everybody, go and get qualified. But in getting qualified, one of the things that happened was people were being taken advantage of, and a lot of private institutions were offering quasi qualifications and some funny qualifications from people whose curriculums were ridiculous, whose methods of evaluation and thing was not meeting the requirements. So you had a lot of problems with the quality of education. So that's also at the same time ACTT came into to the play, and that was important because it slapped some controls onto the systems that were being created for that. All right. So this is one of the reasons why relational leadership really speaks more to socialized vision. So if you ever join an organization, one of the essence or one of the first set of things you need to do is to become accustomed to, especially if it's an organization that's been in existence for a long time, is get to understand the vision and mission statements of the organization, if they have one. If they don't have one, I would say that you need to go through a process of really trying to identify and go through an exercise with your executive leadership and major people in it, and as many of people you can get involved with what is our vision, what's our mission, what's our purpose, why are we doing what we're doing, kind of thing, and kind of buying in with people across the board. All right. And the reason for that is because as an effective leader, you just don't want to impose your vision on other people. Because we go into a job site or we go into an organization or we create organizations and we have an idea. We want to do something and we want to achieve something. We want to go get somewhere. But it's only ours. If we don't get other people around us who share in our vision, and then the organization is not going to move anywhere. It's not going to go anywhere. All right. So and one of the most important things is to make sure that the purpose that we are getting together is one that we share. That we share where we share the purpose of the organization. It's not one that just comes from any one individual across the board. All right. Um, so there is a group that is going to deal specifically with vision, mission, and mission statements, and the power and functionality of vision and purpose. That'll be one of the chapters out of DAFT, if I remember carefully. There we go. Which one? All right, vision and strategic direction. That chapter 13 there, from Madeira, Farrell, and Nathan. It's going to be one of those really important ones that actually is going to cover the function and purpose of the thing. So when we say the relational leadership or the model of relational leadership is focused on the purpose, it's because of the critical nature of what the purpose is. If you like what your organization is doing, you will find yourself committing yourself to it, committing your time, and committing your energies to the organization. I know, for example, for myself, because I think I feel so driven and connected to the vision and mission statement of the organization that I work with. I have, given a lot to the organization. I've sacrificed lots of my time and a lot of my effort into supporting what goes on. And that's something you want, but I know one of the things we suffered from in this organization is work-study balance, work-life balance, which is something that is kind of important. All right. It's not what vision is; it's what vision does. That's what I'm talking to here. This last point down here is what does it do to the individuals in the organization, to the members of your team? What does it do to them if they share that idea, if they share in that purpose? You'd be surprised the mountains you could move with having people who are highly committed to the dreams and of the organization. All right. So as they say here, common purpose is needed to pull people together to work towards that change, and of course that change needs to be seen to be positive. It can't be seen as a negative thing, else, unless of course we are all just evil, that kind of stuff. It has to be something that we see as being positive and contributing to the to to making the world better around us, to making the human condition something that is improved rather than something that is inherently harmful or self-aggrandizing. So it's not profit oriented, which unfortunately a lot of organizations are. So this is why they talk about here, in relation to the objectives or the purpose being a shared purpose, it needs to be a purpose that is positive in nature, positive to the individuals, positive to all of the persons here. All right, you all hearing me there? It's clearing up a connection issue.
Yes, sir.
All right. All right, cool. Uh, is it quieter now? Getting a lot of background noise there. All right. Right. So we're talking about that level of commitment. All right. All right. So that we could move past this because it's the same point that we're talking about. Um, okay. So with organizations, when we're working towards positive change, we come across change theory, and of course, there's a chapter that is going to be presented on leading change. That's how critical that is, because one of the things that is likely to happen in an organization is change. And change causes a lot of problems in organizations because as human beings, we prefer a sort of stability in life. We get accustomed to certain patterns of doing things, a certain way of doing things. And as a result of that, what ends up happening is that when we are faced with change, oftentimes we resist, especially if we view the change as something that is negative. The process of change theory or change theory speaks to us as an organization that has to unfreeze its structure, make the change, and then refreeze it. And that unfreezing is caused by some triggering event. So let's think about, for example, with Costat and the pandemic. At the outset of the pandemic, that's the trigger event. The organization had to change its structure immediately and change into something that creates that was able to respond effectively to the organization's to the prevailing circumstances. All right, or else the company would have faded away. And a lot of you may be familiar with companies that were unable to make adjustments into the online environment and online marketing, and as a result, they failed. They no longer exist. The problem with it is the last part here, which is the refreezing process. The model, though it speaks to that process of unfreezing, changing, and then refreezing, the model actually speaks to it to instead of refreezing the organization, it's actually better for the organization to remain in a slushy type of environment where it's solidified enough in its new circumstances to operate, but remain flexible enough to adjust to the chaos that exists around us. And that is where Costat found itself. I mean, when we made the switch over from, and Narissa, not Narissa, Miss Jones spoke about the teacher who kind of fell on the wayside with the online environment. We also had faculty members and some members of staff, for example, that could not make the transition into the online environment. We still have some of that holdouts there. But at the same time, we also want to stay in a slushy modality so that when necessary, we could also return to the online environment to face to face, so that we need to remain in a more flexible orientation. So the theory of change really speaks to us to remain in a situation of changeability, for want of a different word. Interestingly enough, change management brings to bear a different type of leadership. It's actually referred to as transformational leadership because in order to walk people in an organization through change, you need to sometimes bring in change specialists to help you navigate your way through it, to get people to understand. And because one of the things that ends up happening during the change process is a lot of distrust, especially if people feel as if their fundamental rights and their fundamental arrangements, it's actually called the social compact, with the organization is being changed without their permission. And that's actually that's something that took place for a lot of us. In fact, a lot of my colleagues from Ministry of Education refused to come on board with us at with Costat because of some fundamental changes in the way in which the teaching service was going to treat your employment. So whereas most of you all are familiar with the regular school term, and then you have these holiday breaks in between, in Costat, faculty don't have that. We are full-time employees, and we are entitled to 20 days off for the year. And that 20 days has to be taken either in July or August. It can't be taken at any other point. There's no holidays available in Easter, none for Christmas, all that kind of stuff does not exist. All right. And that was some of the things that, and also too, your teaching times can also be nighttime as well as daytime. And that was something that a lot of, it was really fundamental changes in the working environment. And of course, for some of my older colleagues, it was not something that they were willing to deal with because they'd grown up and they'd worked their entire lives in one particular mode. And many of them chose retirement. Some of them chose reabsorption into the secondary school system. But the vast majority of them, you know, ended up, kind of just, um, a lot of them died actually, good few of them. But those that did survive and made changes, they did well where they went. All right. But again, the reason why change becomes problematic is because, again, you're changing some fundamental aspects of how you operate within an organization. It threatens your position, it threatens your sense of worth in the organization, and also tends to even threaten your stability, how stable you feel in the organization. And that was another thing too. When we left Ministry of Education to come across to Costa, we went from basically what you call tenured positions into contract positions, which are renewed on a 3-year basis, and that provides some serious challenges for people who were accustomed to the government system where you have a pension and that type of stuff that you're contributing towards and that type of thing. So that created a lot of differences. So there was a lot of problems that went with that. All right. So we talked about the change models. Um, so hopefully the team that is going to deal with this chapter will be able to go through these things. All right. One of the things, and yes, this is true, the change is a time consuming. It takes a long time to bring organizations across the board. And sometimes during that process, you simply have to get rid of some people who are holding up the process. And essentially, at the end of the day, in some instances, that was what took place. All right. People had to go. Some people decided to stay, and some people left. And it got kind of difficult after a period of time. All right, so let's go to the next section of inclusivity. So, one of the other elements of the relational leadership model is the creation of inclusivity in your activities as a leader. So, being inclusive means being understanding, valuing, and actively engaging diversities in views, approaches, styles, aspects of individualities, such as gender, sexual orientation, or culture, that add multiple perspectives to a group's activity. Now, why is this important? It's important because, especially where this text was developed in the United States, there's a problem of of dominant cultures or monocultures existing in large parts of the country. So that if you have a group of individuals working in an organization or involved in a group that are basically the same type of individual, same value systems, the same manner of thinking, you're going to find that if approaching a problem, they're all going to come to it with the same set of tools, ideas, and experiences. If we become more inclusive to bringing in other people into our organization, we bring as many different views, perspectives, and views on things that would help us come to a better decision that would be best for everybody. And in essence, therefore, what you do when you're inclusive in your thinking, in your ability to understand other people, you're bringing more stimulus into your thinking process. And as a result of that, this is something that I mean, Trinidad is blessed in the sense that we have a lot more variety that exists. So much so that it is common for us to understand various aspects of each other's culture. So everybody understands Christmas, everybody understands Easter, everybody understands Eid and Diwali and all those kind of things. And talk to a stranger from the United States, from Midwest United States, and you start to talk to them about various cultures that we have developed a great understanding through our participation of the diversity that exists within our country. And they'd be flabbergasted by the amount that you, as an individual, would know of other people's beliefs, gender, religion, and that kind of stuff. We have problems with gender and sexual orientation, yes, okay, because of our very stringent Roman Catholic background as well, because that's also part of the thing. But um, our openness to style, for example, might be something that is, more diverse in nature. So there's a whole host of benefits to be drawn from having an inclusive society, one that is already existing. But if you think about, for those of you who might have traveled and gone abroad, and you go to a place that is primarily a particular group of individual or particular type of individuals, you can understand where that sameness of thought and sameness of perspective becomes a problem. And as a result, as leaders in the Caribbean context, we have to be even more sensitive to being inclusive to those things, especially that are outside our comfort zones. We okay with food, we okay with holidays and that kind of stuff, but when it comes to certain things, we also have to be careful with that. And being inclusive means we have to understand and stop judging people and judging things. All right, that's something I pay attention to. Go and live abroad for a little while, and you might understand that from a deeper um, consensus or deeper position. All right. Inclusive means understanding how different groups or individuals might approach an issue from different perspectives or frames of reference, maintaining the attitudes and respect that difference, valuing equity and involvement. Now, the biggest thing that any organization has that works, the biggest asset, greatest asset, is its people. And the more variety that exists in your people working in your organization, it brings to bear varying perspectives that help to develop you and develop your approach to different things. And that's a really important aspect. And that's the power of inclusivity. There's some other elements that we need to pay attention to. How you go about doing it, Um, all right, so there are a couple of chapters that are going to deal with this complex organization being in communities. These are going to tackle those concepts of organization and inclusivity issues that we're going to come across. So it's going to come across from a number of the different chapters that are going to come up there. All right. Listening with empathy and communicating with civility. Again, our inability to deal with differences or to shun people because of differences is the thing that we're talking about here. Leaders need to lead the way when it comes to this. You can't act. And interestingly enough, I mean, we're seeing so much social media content where differences create problems. Primarily coming out to the United States, we see a lot of this happening with interactions between people in authority and people with differences, be it a color, skin, or walk of life. That treatment and this whole phenomenon of Karens, male and female Karens. What is that? Just jumping in um, and and dealing with nonsense and making snap judgments on people based upon their appearance. And it's really horrible. That doesn't speak to inclusivity. It speaks to exclusivity. Um, Quite an interesting thing. But as a leader, as I said, you have to develop your inclusive skills. All right. Let's see if there's anything specific that we need to get through here. All right. So the goal is not to overcome variations. All right. So this is the other part of it that you have to pay attention to. Your objective as a leader is not to smother the differences, but to use those differences to help build a deeper appreciation of the variations in life that sit around you. Because with those variations, it helps to bring a different perspective to problems and issues that you may be facing within the organization. You never know from somebody's different walk of life. The way they see life is going to be absolutely different to the kind of life that you've led. And that variation, that difference is what is going to make your organization stronger because you're able to deal with and possibly even include rea- uh, some sort of solution that would include those types of individuals who ordinarily would be left on the wayside. All right, so one of the areas in terms of being inclusive that I've experienced a fair amount with is working with differently able people in classrooms. I've had the challenge of teaching blind students in a class, teaching students with, I think it's cerebral palsy, and working with them. I have had autistic students as well operating in classes. And I know a lot of teachers, like when I was working with the two blind guys, it was really critical that a lot of their experiences with other teachers was frustration. And that a lot of the teachers just said, "Listen, I'm not trained for this. I don't know how to treat with you. You need to find somebody else's class to go to." And that was shocking because, interestingly enough, the two individuals that came to the college um, actually came from the Blind Welfare Association, and it was the chief welfare officer and the CEO of the Blind Welfare Association. And what they did, they came to get qualifications and check to see how well COSTAT set itself up to meet its own vision and mission statement to be student centered. You understand? And that's something that, I mean, we weren't thinking of, because that's one of the things, when you think of your student. We didn't think of our students initially from the perspective of having those types of disabilities. And I'm teaching economics to these guys. I mean, this course it would be much easier because it's a kind of read and understand, listen to lectures and stuff like that. So it falls into their ballpark. But I'm teaching um, um, economics to them, which has graph work and applied mathematics, and it is a whole host of different challenges we had. So I had to do some extra work with these guys. I had to get I had to get special tools, braille kits, which I actually imported and bought, and we developed. In fact, the guys, they were able to suggest, when I went to them, we created these. We used these little sticks, and we started to create three-dimensional graph surfaces so that they could feel or see through touch. It was, for me, it was a real learning experience to teach blind students. It was really, really, it stretched me, but I have to say I learned so much from these gentlemen, and they were very humble gentlemen, and I must say it was really an interesting situation, but one in which I learned a lot and had to be very creative about this. Brian Smith. Who's Brian Smith?
My internet giving trouble and it keep logging me off. I'm back in when I use my name.
Who's this though?
Candace Christopher.
All right, okay, Candace, no worries. I just needed to know who you were. Just to suddenly see this Brian Smith here. Okay. All right. Okay, so let's move ahead. So I guess I think you've gotten the idea about what inclusivity has to be, and it's something that all leaders have to work towards and be aware of what your society looks like in that relationship. You need to pay attention to what our society tends to have, um, and don't try to hide things under the carpet, because those variations, differences that exist in our society is something that we have to pay attention to. And it's really critical that we have to pay attention to that, because if we don't, our inability to deal with the variations or the differences in the people that we have to interact with will come back and create further problems for you in the organization, especially if your organization is one that will grow and become much wider in its scope. All right, especially for any of you all who get involved with politics, it's something you have to pay attention to because we have a very limited perception when it comes to that. Um, pretty still pretty im- Pretty still very immature when it comes to making electoral decisions because we tend to be driven by race to a great extent, which is unfortunate, and we don't look to individual strength and individual character, which is something that we ought to pay attention to. All right. The language of inclusivity. Well, that's another element that we have to talk about. When, as a leader, you want to encourage inclusivity, you can't be using exclusive language. So, as much as possible, we have to use the word we and us, and it can't be I and all you. All right. So, you can't use words that are you ought not to use words that tend to exclude individuals. Of course, you'd have to use the I word sometimes and the olia, according to Trinise. All right. But make sure that you move away from the Rastaman talk into the more I and I is we I kind of thing. That kind of stuff they talk about. That's what they're speaking about there in terms of inclusivity. Group work is one of the other elements that comes into this. Um, and there's a small group that's going to deal with groups and teams, and you'll start to look at in terms of that. How you make decisions will also give a good idea of your comfort level for inclusivity. Um, so in terms of making group decisions, for example, one of the most popular ways is voting. And unfortunately, when you use voting as your key method of decision making, it tends to create problems. It tends to marginalize people because if you think about it from any you have a group of 10 people and 6 people vote for one thing, so it passes, but that leaves 4 people who are marginalized in the decision. A better process might be to utilize a consensus model where a position is brought to the organization, and through consensus, that particular decision is modified to make it comfortable for everybody to fully support the organization or to support the decision making. The problem with consensus building, however, is that it takes time and it requires a lot more effort on the part of leaders, and oftentimes doesn't lend itself to quick decision making. It becomes even more difficult the larger the group becomes. Small groups is easier to get to consensus than it would be for a large group to do so. Um, so there will be sometimes, I guess, when you're going to have to utilize voting as a decision making process, but consensus building is probably the better method for doing that. Um, so think about that as well in terms of getting to group decisions. Also, when you're thinking about inclusivity, you have to think beyond the organization itself. So, in your organization, you have to pay attention to those people who are impacted by what you do or affected by what you do. That will be stakeholders and shareholders. All right, shareholders are people who have a direct benefit that they get, that they develop with you. So, in your organization, it might be uh, suppliers, people who supply your raw materials for production, or part of your base for action, where you get your students from, that type of stuff. Those are shareholders. Stakeholders would be people who benefit from the output. So employers, the area that for Costat. So our stakeholders would be the business sector, the any area that we put our trainees into, they benefit from it, and therefore they have a stake in what we do. When you're trying to deal with inclusivity, you have to remember making decisions, you have to make sure you engage these individuals. So when you make decisions from within your organization, you pay attention to that. Now, I don't know if any of you all have ever seen or taken part in any discussion forums or stakeholder meetings. Any of you all ever took part in any of those things within COSTAT or within the organizations that you work for? Uh, Focus groups, anything along those lines? Um, Actually, that's one of the methods that we utilize in COSTAT when we're treating with making serious decisions and changes. Oftentimes, run focus groups involving stakeholders, shareholders, as well as students and faculty and staff of the organization. It's quite an interesting process to be included in that, um, both from full-time and part-time status as well. That's something that has to work because you have to get contributions from people with varying perspectives of the organization to be able to make decisions about what's taking place. Yes, somebody has a question. So, sir,
Yes, sir. I just wanted to know if being part of an association would be considered what?
part of an association.
Yeah.
That's a larger group then.
Okay.
Uh, uh, when you say association, you're talking about a national association?
Professional association?
Yep, that's a huge group. In fact, it's international in scope, is it?
Yes.
Membership from, yeah, that's international in nature. Yep,
Okay.
that's a big organization. There are some that are smaller, but for the vast majority of people, when they start to get involved with things, they're going to end up with larger groupings. All right, so we understand the need to pay attention to what our stakeholders and shareholders and try to include them in decision making as well. Again, what you want is to use a more consensus approach to the decision, but remember, stakeholders and shareholders, they tend to um, all right, so this gives you a kind of perspective of where a stakeholder or shareholder might fall. What we're doing might be of low importance to them or high importance, but they may have high opposition to something or have high levels of support for it. What we would like is for everybody to be all supportive, but though they may be supportive, it's of low priority for them. So what you have to do is evaluate your shareholders and stakeholders to see where they may fall and pay attention to the efforts that you put in, especially to those that is highly important to and have high opposition towards. You have to pay a lot of attention to these people and utilize your best techniques dealing with those who have a tendency to be um, have this positioning here, antagonistic, because those are the people you would have to pay attention because they would tend to make the most amount of noise. In fact, if for those of you who've been paying attention to COSTAT, you may have paid attention to a number of articles that emerged out that involve COSTAT. You'd recognize that the Nursing Council and the Ministry of Health have some, not nice things to say about COSTAT. That's because the training of nurses is of high importance to the nation as well as to the hospitals. Um, and there's a high level of opposition to some of the changes that are being suggested. S- Students tend to be highly opposition, and because the degree takes time to get done because it involves a lot of work inclusive of a lot of clinical studies that has to go on at the various hospitals. Now, for those of you who don't know, nurses are paid during part of they're paid for their clinical supervision or their, what do you call it, their clinical, when they go out to work as student nurses, they are actually paid stipends for it. So nursing students like to get to that position in the program very quickly. The problem is the college has requirements that you have to meet in order to get into that position or thing. So there's high levels of support coming from the ministry and from the government for us to do our job, but there's a high level of opposition by the students in that section, and they tend to become antagonistic. All right. For us, sitting from our end in probably the Department of of entrepreneurship and stuff, management and digital entrepreneurship, we see that as problematic, but it's low priority. You understand? For our department, it's not. We don't have direct involvement, but for the college, it's one that has a lot of problems. Yes, Victoria, hand still up.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to point out that
Mm-hmm.
your slides not coinciding with the one I have. So
Which ones?
my slide 43 is what you have up as 44.
All right, that's because I added new things. So you're using the ones that you got off the class.
The one that's in the classroom, yes.
Yeah, right. I made changes because I go through it every semester and make changes.
So you're going to share it with us?
Yeah, I will update them. I'll update them for
Okay,
you.
thanks.
So, but you're the first person to actually see the variation.
This is the second variation. Yeah, I had a diagram before that wasn't there.
That would be this these diagrams moving through.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, but if you want, I will send it or I'll put it into the chat so they can pull it and get this one. But it's really just cosmetic stuff, on more than less. But yeah, as you might see. All right. Okay, so once you could determine where your people fall, you develop your strategies to deal with them, which is what I refer to as responsive to stakeholders and shareholders. All right, it's really a critical thing, and it calls upon leaders to have a little more political IQ, to handle their 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 behavior and their work in that area. All right, so next area, empowerment or empowering, as is with the thing. Now, what is empowerment? So there are two elements to empowerment: the sense of self that claims ownership in the process or in the organization. That is something that is that that we have to develop in ourselves. So we want to feel involved and we take ownership of things. And the second aspect is to create the environment in which the organization promotes that development of self empowerment. All right. It is important, therefore, as a leader, that you exhibit through your own behavior a sense of entitlement to act and to get involved and help other people in the organization to get involved with what's going on by creating an environment that encourages it. All right, that makes sense? Yes? Um, Oftentimes, however, this type of thinking doesn't happen. All right, and empowerment is something that is claimed by the individual who believes that they have a right to be in the organization, to feel and think the way they do, to say what they need to say, of course, in a respectful manner, of course, and that you have a right to act and work towards something. It is the function of the leader to make sure that the followers of today become leaders tomorrow. And that's an important element. One of your key functions in the organization is to ensure that you create a sense of empowerment within people. If you're able to do that, you will get more out of them from within the organization. You'll get more meaningful commitment to the organization from empowering them to be able to do what they need to do. One of the things that oftentimes happens within organizations is the leaders create a great deal of distrust and they cut down other people in the organization by literally just setting them up, um, and creating a situation where if they get involved or they show any form of empowerment, you try to shut them down because the leader sees that as a threat to their position. That's a very short-sighted view of how organizations ought to run. Unfortunately, in a lot of instances, especially within government organizations, we find that empowerment is not something that is encouraged. Far too often, anybody who, and generally it happens very early on too, because the organizational culture will beat it out of you. You know, you get to a job and you feel excited and you want to, get involved and do things, and then slowly and it gets chipped away. People in the organization say, hey, hold your horses, young blood, and chill your piggy. And, you know, they tell you to not get involved, stay back, hold off, don't do, smell the roses. I remember I was working at a job and, I had to get in early because of the way in which traffic works. You get in early to the office, and I would just pull out 6 o'clock in the morning, half six, 7 o'clock, finish, get something to eat and stuff. I'd sit at my desk and I start to pull out and get some work done. I remember my boss coming in and or at least the supervisor of my section coming in and saying to me, you need to stop doing that. You're making everybody else look bad. And I remember one day he came and he dropped up papers on my desk and take all the files that I had on my desk and say, hey, read that. I was in absolute shock. And that was the kind of culture that I met. And that was in the Ministry of Works. I was working there for a little period of time. And it was amazing the way in which the administrative culture or the culture of an organization can be forced upon you by the individuals within it, and very publicly too, because there's a public means of, and your desk is right there in the middle of everybody. It's not like you're working all by yourself, all in a corner. All right, that kind of negative behavior teaches something different. So empowerment is something that in order to be claimed has to be supported. Because yes, everybody could come in and feel empowered in an organization, but if there is no return and reward from that behavior, then there's a likelihood that people tend to drop out. So as a leader, you want to ensure you want to be clear what type of environment you want. Do you want to empower people to get their work done and to feel connected to the organization and give 120%? Or do you just don't care? And how would hang it swing kind of situation like that. That's the nature of what you're dealing with there. All right. All right. So let's see any other elements. So there is a chapter here that's going to present this in a lot more detail. That is chapter 12, Power and Influence. Um, that is going to deal with power and influence and empowerment in more detail. So when we talk about empowerment, what we're talking about is power. And empowerment means giving up power. So one of the things that oftentimes happens with leaders is that they don't like empowering others because they believe that power is all or none. You either have power or you don't have power. So it's seen as a zero-sum game, and that is that's kind of like a traditional view. All right, I have power of everybody. Nobody could do anything until I tell them to do, and that is the situation that kind of creates problems. So where does this power come from, and how do people end up in organizations with power? So positional leadership is one of these situations where power comes from. Um, it means that if a leader has to empower people, they have to be willing to share their power with other people. Not only your power, but your authorization as well. You can't delegate or give somebody else something to do without the authority to do so. So, I mean, if it's simple things like, having the authority to get to use the office or to access to a particular set of files, or code access to a particular um, machine to utilize. Those are the kind of things that you have to give up as a positional leader to be able to facilitate empowering other folks. All right, you can't um, be looking at somebody every second of every day. You know, it doesn't work that way. Um, and you can't dictate everything that they do by paying attention to them all the time. So this is what we talk about power being a zero sum game for some people. That's the conventional or traditional view of things. There are different types of powers that exist, or power that exists within organizations. There's power dynamic range from power over people, that's the autocratic approach, power with people, that's collaborative power, and power alongside people, that's collegial power. That is people working within organizations or associations. Those organizations have power within societies because of the nature of what they do. All right, so there's some elements here of power that is going to be repeated in that other presentation. Um, you're going to hear them talk a lot about positional power, or positional leaders, because that's one of the sources of power. And for most of us, we're going to be in organizations in which people are going to have authority over us simply because they're a manager, they're a supervisor, they're the head of the department, they're the CEO, whatever. They are given that power by the status of their office, their job title. Um, does it mean that they're actually good at their job? That's up for grabs sometimes. All right. Now, sources of power. This is how people in organizations arrive in positions of power. So there are five primary sources, and as I said before, another group is going to deal with this. Expert power. These are the bases or sources of power. Reverent power, legitimate power, coercive power, and reward power. So an expert power comes from somebody being an expert. So this is somebody with a lot of technical expertise and information and training, and they basically kind of know their stuff. That expert power is something that people would respect, and they would defer or go to that individual for assistance, or defer to that individual for guidance when it comes to those areas of technical skills. Referent power is similar to expert, but referent power develops over time. What happens is somebody in the organization ends up in a position where they are viewed upon by the other people in the organization as being sort of a sage. Somebody who has been around enough within the organization to know a lot about the institutional's history and has a lot of institutional knowledge, and therefore is looked upon as somebody who's not necessarily going to be in a positional situation or position of power, but they are looked upon as being one of those guys who, hey, they really know what this organization about, how it runs. They know the backstories to everybody, and they get that reverent approach. Legitimate power, of course, is power that is attached to the position you hold. So if you hold the manager's position, the CEO's position, that is your legitimate or positional power that you end up with. Now, being in that position offers you two other sources of power, coercive or reward power, and they're sort of like the same coin but different sides. Coercive power is the ability to punish people through some form of punishment. So, well, it's sort of repetitive, but that means you exert influence over other people's actions because of the inherent threat of something else happening. That could be loss of income, loss of job, um, disciplinary action, those kind of things. It's coercive in the sense that it's some sort of punishment or punitive type of activity. As opposed to that, another individual may choose to use reward power. So instead of the threat of punishment, you have the threat, the possibility of reward. Now it's two sides of the same coin, because reward is supposed to try to motivate people to do things with with the fact that okay, I could get bonus days off, I could get CTO, um, I could get a bonus in my paycheck, something along those lines. Reward power, and some of the rewards need not be financial; they may also be just recognition, an award that you get at the end of the day. So in essence, they are both the same type of action. Because if you refuse to give somebody the reward, it becomes coercive in nature. All right. So if you offer a reward to somebody but they don't perform and they don't get it, you could take the reward away. So it's coercive in nature as well. So as I said, it's two sides of the same coin. So these are what they refer to as the bases of power, and we just kind of went through and explained them already. All right. Sources of power. Um, so one of the things in terms of understanding power is oftentimes we give away power we have. So how do we give away power without knowing it? Um, One, when we don't trust ourselves. A lot of us know our stuff, but because we don't hold a position of power within an organization, when somebody comes to you with some sort of idea or the manager brings something to the thing, and for some reason you have some sort of disconnect and you say this not sounding right, and you don't say anything about it because you don't trust, you don't have confidence enough in your opinion or your technical opinion about something, and you're afraid of contradicting them. And a lot of us may suffer from this, especially when there are meetings taking place and there's a lot of people around you in the organization. In that meeting, you may not want to look like an idiot. And because you don't quite trust your opinion about something, you hold back. Again, that's one way you give away your power. All right. Um, when somebody with positional power or legitimate power announces a plan, let's say your manager comes in and say, okay, this is what we're going to do, yada yada yada, and we don't say anything, we just let them go ahead and they run with it. Once we don't say anything, we give away our power again, because if they've approached the group as, it's sort of like what I do here in class. I would ask questions, and if nobody says anything, you've given away your power of engaging in a discussion and making a different decision. So if I say, okay, next class we'll be doing arrangements for the debate, how you feel about that? And nobody says anything. Okay, well, next week I'll see you all and we'll be dealing with our arrangements for the debate. You understand? You gave away your power there without engaging in discussion because of something is holding you back. All right. If you engage and say, no, 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 we need that time to do something else and yada, 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 then we engage in that and possibly the decision could be changed. But again, another thing that we also do is sometimes we ascribe power to somebody simply because of the little we know about them. So in this example here, they're saying that when in a group you assume that somebody in your group is a communications major, they will be better at writing. That's a huge assumption. So we are assuming skills for an individual that should have that power, but or ability, but we are giving that power to that individual. So it's something that happens with classes here. So a lot of people might say, "Hey, he's an IT student. He gonna know how to do PowerPoints and all that kind of thing." Not necessarily. IT is not really about PowerPoint. IT is about understanding how computers work, how networks work, what programming is about, how to write programs, create apps, and that kind of stuff. Not necessarily how to utilize the tools or software tools. All right. And in fact, that person might not have a good eye for design. Somebody else might have it. So this is another way in which we give power by assuming people have the capacity to do something without really checking on it. So those are things that we have a tendency to do that oftentimes we need to pay attention to. Power is not finite, and indeed can be shared. Now, this is contrary to traditional thinking that power is finite and you have to hold on to it no matter what. All right, and that 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 frame of reference is what causes a lot of problems in organizations with traditional leadership. They see themselves as the bastion of power, and if you want something, you must come to them. Then there are other elements that actually would tend to have to be discussed in relation to that, that the other group will present. So sharing power is not seen as something that is good, first off, in traditional things. And I suspect some of you all have experienced this. But the bigger element really is that you have to pay attention to the need for when you're sharing power with other folks and you're giving them, you can't give them a little piece of it and hold back. You has to give them everything. I say that for the reason that oftentimes I found myself with some leaders who have that habit of doing that. They would say, okay, go and get this done. And then you halfway through the process, you realize that they're setting you up. I've dealt with that before, and that happens with delegation a lot. They give you responsibility, but they don't give you well, they give you tasks to do, but they don't give you all of the authority to get it done. That hampers you. And then, of course, what happens is at the end of the day, you can't get it done. And you come back to reporting it, and you get embarrassed and put down by the leader that actually gave you the thing. And sometimes it happens in front of other people. So, in essence, what you do is you set somebody up. And in setting somebody up like that, you've created a situation where you've delegated responsibility, you've delegated work, but you didn't delegate the necessary authority to get it done. And that leads to basic kind of like a sabotage situation taking place. And it is designed, and it's almost Machiavellian in nature. It's designed to teach you that you don't have power. So shut up and stay in your bat in your crease kind of thing. I have seen that happen time and again, and it's unfortunate it happens in the public service a lot. A lot of a lot of officers who try to get things done, who try to move things forward, are oftentimes set up like this to make them look like the fool, to teach them that power resides with the other individual, not with you. So, bat in your crease kind of situation. And that's unfortunate because at the end of the day, a lot of times that hoarding of power creates a lot of negativity, not only within the organization, but for those of us outside the organization trying to interact with individuals working in there. So be careful when you do that, okay? Self empowerment, of course, we spoke about this up from the very beginning. It's something that we have to encourage our other people to get involved with, and we have to project that as well, self empowerment, through a number of things. For example, our own education, through leading and inspiring others. Um, so, for example, I might actually be able to do training for with other people to help them with this sort of self empowerment, and of course, structuring the environment to be able to take part of self empowerment. You also have providing the opportunities and resources for people to become self empowered, mentoring for those of us around us in your organization, and of course, taking on the opportunities to exhibit and be, self-empowered yourselves. That's the nature of what needs to be going on. But as a leader, you need to both encourage and exhibit. So you have to lead by example. In empowerment, we have to pay attention to marginalization and mattering. It is important for us as leaders to remember that everybody in an organization matters. But if people feel marginalized, they're not going to feel that what they think is matters. So this whole concept of mattering and marginalization is something we have to pay attention to. Far too often in organizations, people at the lower end of our spectrum, so to speak, in organizational importance, primarily custodial staff, have a tendency to be ignored by administrative staff when making decisions about operational matters in the organization. And they are, in fact, in a lot of instances, scorned, physically scorned by individuals in the workplace. Um, they don't want them to around them. They don't want them in the kitchen. They don't want them touching you. Why? Because they clean the toilets. I hope to God you clean the toilets at home. So that, if that's the case, then who, what happens? But my point being is that if you behave in that manner with everybody in your with certain sections in your organization like that, you're creating pockets of marginalization, which means you're going to be creating problems in your organization that lead to um, core areas of dissent that weaken the organization. And of course, exhibits the fact that as a leader, you are actually creating that. So one of the things that any leader has to pay attention to is to make sure that everybody in the organization is felt to matter and they don't get marginalized. It's just unfortunate that the way in which we position the hierarchy in organization helps to create this or support this kind of mattering and marginalization activities. It's really uh, a negative thing that happens, and it's something you have to pay attention to as a leader. Because if you're creating empowerment in the environment, then that's something you have to pay attention to. You can't keep people on peripheral areas of the organization. Everybody's important. The more people that you push into these marginal areas, it creates problems for you in the future. All right, and it could become very endemic as well too. So you have a sense of isolation not only with the lower end of the organization, but also you start to get different stratas of the organization feeling separate and apart. I know one of the departments that suffers a lot by this or from this is the HR departments of most organizations suffers a lot of negative 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 feelings because of the nature of what they get involved with. And HR is oftentimes looked at as being, apart from the rest of the organization. Another department that gets that too is also payroll, especially when things go wrong with payroll. All right. Pay attention to those things because as part of the organizational culture or what they call the organizational dynamics of your organization. So pay attention to those things because it's likely to be important for you to strategize and to ensure that if you arrive in positions of leadership, you're able to, sort of even that out. It's unfortunate though that if you come into an organization that already exists, changing organizational culture is an uphill battle because people get stuck in the sort of behavioring, that type of behavior, and categorizing and stigmatizing people within the organization. That's something that you have to pay attention to across the board. But again, clearly, if you arrive in those situations, it is inherent upon you to empower those individuals in the organization because eventually those people become the potential for the new leadership moving forward. Make sense? All right, so now we get to ethics, and we've spoken a great deal about ethics before, but of course, here we're talking about the need for leaders to exhibit very high levels of ethical values. So let's start talk. What is ethics? Ethics is the social rules that govern and limit our conduct, especially the ultimate rules of what is considered to be right or wrong. So that's one of the things that we want to pay attention to. It's derived from ethos, that Greek word. Other definitions include the principles of conducting, governing an individual or a profession, and or is a standard of behavior. Being ethical means conforming to those standards of a given profession or group, sort of like what Ms. Sosa was asking about. Any group can set up its own ethical standards and then live by them or not, depending upon what they do. Those are the ethical values that we keep on talking about. ethical standards, whether they are established by an individual or an organization, help guide persons in their decision-making processes. So, for our purposes, the model will define ethics as rules or standards that govern behavior. All right, so that's what we're going to be looking at. What are those rules and standards that govern our behavior, and where did they come from? Um, Principles like values, ethics, standards, and morals provide true north direction. So, in essence, what we're saying here is those principles are supposed to be our guiding principles in life. Um, it points to ideal behaviors, and we ought to be measuring how far away from that we are. That's why we refer to it as true north. All right. Because of these of problems, and especially in the past, a lot of professional standards have been created and, of course, changed. I know accounting has had that change a few times. Their professional standards. You have the code of ethics for the HEPA for the medical field. You have the nursing oath. I think there are various oaths. There's the teaching oath, not the oath, but the teaching rules and standards. A lot of organizations and a lot of professionals have codes of conduct that they have to follow. In fact, some of you may be unaware, but there's actually a document called Students Code of Conduct. Any of you all ever set eyes on that? Students Code of Conduct? No?
Yes, sir.
All right, right. Where did you meet that, Miss Jones?
Um, well, I cussed that, especially with like Nexicats and stuff, and
Uh-huh.
that's where I learned it from.
Okay, cool. All right, but you should have come across it when you did FYEC 100.
Yeah, we actually got a PDF with it and stuff, and we had to
Correct.
read it through.
Yeah, to understand it. All right. So, what is if we talk about ethics and now we talk about morals? Well, so what does that mean? These are principles related to right or wrong, arising from one's conscience or one's sense of good and evil. Wow, some broad, deep thinking there. All right. Um, Pertaining to the discernment of good and evil, instructive of what is good or evil or bad. So this is what morals are in terms of, as opposed to ethics. Morals are commonly thought to be influenced by religion or personal beliefs. Moral leadership is concerned with good leadership, that is leadership with good meaning, means, and good ends. Sorry, my bad. All right, so this is the sticky area and the icky sticky area of leadership, because this is where a lot of leaders fail, holding to standards of behavior and holding to moral values. That is something that is critical. And the relational leadership model is values driven, because remember we said that from the very definition, leadership is the relationship between the individuals, leaders and followers, working together in an ethical manner to achieve a common or positive purpose or positive change. So this is the trickiest part, especially where we have come out or where we still have examples of leadership around us that appears to be fraught with questionable moral values and ethical values. I mean, we are looking at you know some leaders engaged in warfare with each other, and the rhetoric that goes on between the countries, and in between all of that, you have people suffering and dying. You have the political standoffs in one instance, and then you have it's a whole host of things, and you wonder, why we have the kind of life we have. It's because of some of the nonsense that goes on like this. All right. So the model is this part of the model is where the sort of like the rubber meets the road kind of situation, because it is the part of the model that places the responsibility of clearly on the leaders to be ethical and moral in their behavior. And this starts from you understanding what are your own personal beliefs. Ensure that an organization that you're going into, the the belief structure that you have fits with them, that there's overlap between them. Because if you end up in an organization where it values things differently than you do, then you're going to start to engage in something called cogn- cogn- cognitive, cognitive dissonance. Got that right eventually. Um, and for any of you all who have ever experienced that, that's kind of like a icky feeling you get inside that makes it feel that makes it discourages you from going to school or going to work or engaging with somebody when you're experiencing cognitive dissonance. There's something inherently wrong with what you're doing, and it doesn't sit right in your mind. And for some people, they can have serious fallouts with it. Other people, they're willing to work with it, but that brings into question, you know, if your personal belief structure is so flexible that you're willing to give up on your thing, then that speaks to a lack of strength of character. So those are the things we're talking about from here. Make sure that you're so basically what we're looking for is a sort of universal set of rules that can govern both your behavior and actions in a company or organization that also govern your behavior and actions in the world around you in your everyday day-to-day life. And this is where the disconnect can take place because oftentimes it's the other way around. An organization, especially private and profit oriented organizations, have a tendency to run with profits at any cost kind of attitudes. So the ethical standards and stuff is just to meet legal requirements. But when it measures up to your personal environment, coming from whatever value structure that you've developed, be it out of church or just simply from your environment and from your home, though if those values begin to clash with each other, you're going to find yourself in that dissidence area that I spoke about. If you're willing to put up with it, then it means that we have to question, you should be questioning, I should say, your basic values across the board because it's almost like you're saying, okay, over here I'll be cutthroat and I'll be so and so, and over here I'll be open and caring and inclusive. So unless you're schizophrenic, then that's not going to be something that I would say is a good thing for you. All right, but again, this is the critical part of the model that the relational leadership model is speaking to being ethical in our behavior. And but there's so much about this because we keep on having excellent examples of people doing the wrong thing all the time. I mean, just the other day there was somebody who was identified. I mean, the case is in court, so I mean, we ought not to say it, but think about this: you have somebody who's running an organization that's supposed to be seeking the interests of children, being charged with um, interfering with children. How is that a possibility? How can that be? Where's the disconnect there that's happened? I mean, unfortunately, I hope it turns out to be a false allegation, but at the same time, um, too often do I hear these kind of stories. Somebody's given the responsibility to look after a part of the society, to look after part of the vulnerable in our society, and they're the ones who are doing the worst amount of damage towards those individuals. It's kind of funny that they work themselves into that organization to find themselves in that position. It's sort of like um, teachers, interestingly, are in positions of a lot of trust and influence. How, therefore, can a teacher get involved with a student? How does that happen? Where does that line? And here we're talking about very young students. Yeah? In a situation where you have mature students That's a different circumstance because there's different areas of connectivity that take place, but it can't happen within your same class, right? So there's a whole set of things that that bring to question why is our ethical values having problems when it comes to the behavior of leaders around us. Can you think of any ethical leaders around you, those that really hold their value? Anybody? Because regardless of all these slides that I have here, it's speaking to that particular issue. We've had more examples of poor ethical leadership and leadership decisions than I can find positive people. And even within the positive people, it's not a consistent behavior. Yes, Victoria.
So, the Prime Minister of Barbados, she intends to impress on me a lot.
Yes,
And I
she
think
does.
she, yeah. If I'm to say a leader in today's
Uh-huh.
present, she would be the one.
Yeah, I was looking at her dressing down of the at the
At the
last
UN,
UN
yes.
there. It was
Every time she
impressive.
goes on the world stage, she impresses us.
Yeah, she always impresses me as a statesman. She's really the envisions me. So yeah, you're right. Yeah, I've been impressed with her several times because it's not the first time she's done it. Um, but I don't know if our friend from Barbados was here. It would have been nice to get her take on it, but she's not here today. But so remember, for us to have a discussion with her because we're so far removed from her position of power, we may not know other things or other positions that might exist. But from on the world stage, definitely, she's being looked
If
at.
if the
Uh,
Federation talk ever comes back up again, I don't know. He
that ain't
would be a
happen.
consideration, boy. I
No,
know, but I'm just
um,
saying.
well, Federation actually was gave way to CARICOM, and Cari, that's where that movement went to. Federation failed because of a number of different issues, but we were set up to fail. If you go back in your history and look at that, because that was a British setup. I'm telling you, that was a British setup. That's what led to independence, huh? Because you have to remember why the British wanted the federation was to offload the Commonwealth, to offload the colonies. It was getting too expensive to manage them. So they wanted this um, common view of things and reduce the cost of it. So that was a real big setup there. Check back in history in relation to that, and you might see what we're talking about. But CARICOM is the better organizational structure, and she's quite active in that. In fact, it's one of the main things she goes into. Anybody else comes together, and this is the sad thing, we might be able to find nice, ethical, valuable people in our personal experiences, which is good, at least from a personal experience. Priests or pundits around us or any sort of religious, but unfortunately, at the same time, we have to always remember these are human beings and they're prone to make mistakes, just like you and I. And unfortunately, we can't judge undone because the situation is that a leader has to go through growth processes and understand that some of the things that they're doing may not be measuring up, and they need to be open to listening to the advice of their followership to be able to encourage them to make better decisions from an ethical and moral standpoint. The problem with ethics and morals is that one, ethical, not well, not so much ethical, but moral values change over time. So what was moral or ethical in one time frame is will not be ethical or moral in another time frame, and that creates its own problems because of the variations that take place. Um, and the problem that might also come up with that is the level of commitment somebody has to older standards as opposed to newer standards. That is something that can also create a bit of dissonance in individuals taking place there. The point that we have to take from this is that the ethical element of the relational leadership model is one that is critical, so critical that we have two presentations on it. We have chapter 6, presentation 3, integrity and moral purpose from the main text, the same text I'm looking at, and we have an alternative view of courage and moral leadership, presentation 5, coming from the DAF textbook. So we're looking at it from two different perspectives because of how critical it is. But our key focus is going to be in terms of integrity and moral purpose. Because one of the things that comes up with this too is the concept of ethical dilemmas and how we go about making decisions when it comes to that. Because a lot of us will face dilemmas in our lives of an ethical nature. In fact, some of you all have already gone through some. And that is what the midterm is going to focus your attention on, some of those things. What did you do and how did you behave? But we're going to present some theory and some models for you to kind of look at what's going on there. All right. So we kind of get the point that they're trying to make with this, right? Moral values and its importance. The issue here is that we have to pay attention to where you are. First off, you have to start by looking at your own value systems. What do I stand for? Um, how far am I willing to go to advance the common good or to do the right thing, as opposed to just follow the leader kind of situation or follow along with the everybody else. Would I stand apart? All right. Um, these are some soul searching questions that the exercise talks about. Um, of course, leading by example is one of the things that is you're going to have to go. Is one of the things that's expected of you as fitting into leadership positions. The problem is that you have to suffer through some of this as well, because you really gonna have to start questioning your position, especially if you have problems with people. You have to look at, you know, is something wrong with me? And that's why we go back. Is what am I doing correct? Is it, so it's a never-ending process of self-investigation of your own value structure, your value system. Okay, and that's something you're gonna have to pay attention to. All right, because one of the things that is proven is that we learn better from what we see others do, and what we say. If what we say and what we do are
It
two
is
different
three
things.
minutes past 8.
Yes, miss. But we started at 5:30, so we go to 8:30. Candace? Yes. I
I'm
was
sorry,
hoping.
so what did you say?
I said we started classes at 5:30, so we go to 8:30. And I don't know, were you here for that discussion at the beginning of
No, sir,
classes?
but I looked at the how far you reach in the slide, and I assume that we'll be going until you finish it.
Yeah, we are. We're going to about 8:30. I'm almost ready to push forward. It's not a problem. All right. Okay. So we were talking about leading by examples and so on. Um, and the euphemism that we always have, what you say, what you do speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say. That's really important, because for a lot of us, some people speak in one way and then behave a particular in another way, and that is actually what we need to make sure, that there is no disconnect between the two for you as a leader. Um, you have to walk your talk, basically, in essence. All right. Uh, all right. So we talked about leading by example. Um, the issues that come up with sustaining that type of, that's another thing too. Sustaining that consistency in behavior across the board. Um, it, 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 it comes with its struggles, as I said. But as I said, it's going to be the most critical part of it that you're going to pay attention to. All right, so the last element in the relational leadership process model is process orientation. So, what does process orientation mean? Process refers to how the group goes about being a group, remaining a group, and accomplishing group purpose. Process also is the way in which we go about doing things. The process needs to be what's the process you utilize to make a sandwich? All right, you get your two bread type activities, you get this, you get that, you put this in place, you do that, you apply this, XYZ. A process, how you go about doing something. Each element that we spoke about so far has to be process driven. How you go about generating your purpose, which is how do you go about developing your vision and mission statement? How do you go about being inclusive? How do you go about being empowering? How do you go about being ethical? They have to be process driven so that at the end of the day, every element of the relational leadership model is repeatable and can be evaluated, examined, corrected, and basically that's the nature of process orientation. Process orientation allows us to pull apart any particular model and make changes in the pieces in order to be able to make it better. That is the power of process oriented or systems thinking. All right, because it creates a systematic way of going through how we're going to be doing things and making corrections across the board. All right, each process allows us to evaluate the failure points, the where. So think about it from this position. Every time you've gone through a period of leadership activities, or let's take out leadership and say, every time you go through a semester and you look at the way in which you engage in your learning activities, your assessments, and putting up your stuff, how many of you pay attention to evaluating what took place and making any form of changes that will help to make it a better experience in the future? How many of you all do that? How many of you all approach your learning as a systematic process orientation? Miss Jones? Miss Jones, your hand is up, but your mic needs to go on.
I see.
Hi.
For me, I like to take the time to utilize the course evaluations, especially because that helps me to take a deeper look at things that happen during the class. You know, how we have the option to make comments,
Yep,
how the
yep,
lecture flow. So I like to take advantage of that.
right. One of the other places that you can do that too is also in your portfolio. Are you still working on your portfolio?
Portfolio for this class?
For the did you start with a portfolio in FYEC 100?
Oh, yes, I remember that. Yes, sir.
One of the things you can do is to use the same portfolio to help collecting data for every class that you've done as part of your review process. And that is
Okay,
one of the tools you can use. If you still have it available, you could do it and add it to it. Because what it does allow you to do, it allows you to evaluate the problem with doing that though is the issue of time, because the pace at which we're running through the semester, and we're getting ready for the next semester, and everything just crashes one into the next. The pace of life is what creates a lot of problems with reflecting and contemplating what's taken place in the past to be able to make corrections, because that's the power of process orientation. Process orientation allows us, we have to pause, look at what took place to evaluate it and assess it so that we can make corrections in the process. For example, I might have some issues with my value structure, my value system, and I will need time to make that correction. But the first and most important element that I have to pay attention to is you have to recognize that you have a problem. That's the first thing. If you don't see a problem, then you're never going to fix it. You understand what I'm talking about? And that is the focal point of what relational leadership process orientation is going to be about. Every part of this that we're going to be looking at is about being able to process orient every aspect of the model, be able to evaluate it, be able to correct it, make changes for positive growth, right? So that's the nature of it. So every aspect, our ethics, our inclusivity, our empowering processes, all of those things require us to be able to make an evaluation of how successful we have been with any part of it to be a good leader and across the board. So again, the relational leadership process is one that is circular in nature because it takes us through all of the different aspects and has us always looking at making corrections and revaluations and evaluating what we did right and wrong and that type of stuff. And so there's a lot of that we have to be looking at all the time. Um, we also have to be able to um, develop some sort of level of profound understanding, which is what they call meaning making. So, in order for us to connect properly into the relational leadership process, it needs to mean something to you, both from an intellectual point of view as well as an emotional point of view. So, meaning making it means something to you, um, and it hurts your spirit when it doesn't go the right way. That's part of the process. All right. These processes include collaboration, reflection, feedback, civil confrontation, meaning you get people to talk to you in a civil manner, but they're telling you things about what's not being done right. Community building, which is working on your ability to work with other folks and stuff like that, and a profound understanding called meaning making, which is it being of an intellectual and emotional importance to you as an individual. So the whole process orientation is going to be one that is reflective, challenging, collaborative, caring. It's always going to be um, so some of the questions you might ask during the process: why do we do the things this way? Can we do it better? That's in terms of some of the activities I could get up to in terms of driving towards that. Um, Collaboration, cooperation. One of the things that you would realize in as leaders is that competitive systems that tend to naturally attach itself to the way in which our departments are organized has no bearing on the operations of leadership. Leadership is one that it should be conducted in an environment of cooperation and collaboration. Um, that type of competitive nature that oftentimes is what everybody says you have to. If you look at those films where everybody's fighting for positions of leadership in organizations, it always comes across as at the end of the day, the team operates better who can work best together, which is one of the things that goes on in our organizations. So um, that's one of the things you're going to come across. Let's see what else I need to cover here. Self-awareness, strengths, limits, time. Meaning making. We spoke about this already, from an intellectual or cognitive point of view, as well as from an emotional or understanding point of view. It means that so like the degree that you're doing now is something that is going to definitely impact upon your cognitive senses, your training and your development. But based on what will make it more meaningful for you is how your spirit feels in relation to it, and the way your spirit feels in relation to it is going to be related to the relationships that you've developed with the people around you during the process of doing this degree. Same thing when you are in an organization. The the activities that you get up to would make it meaningful if you've developed both on a professional level and on a personal level. So it's connected to you in that way. All right. All right. So we could have part of this thoughts and action. So this is the meaning making flow that they talk about. You get all this information data. You gather it and you organize it into information. That then translates into the development of your knowledge. That knowledge is then utilized to improve and increase your understanding. That increase in understanding, it broadens your wisdom and it impacts your thoughts and actions. And of course, that has a natural impact upon how you feel about things. So, meaning making. Um, all right, so we could get past meaning making. See, I'm not seeing anything else here. Reframing. Right. Second use of the word meaning is that it involves people's values and relationships and commitments. People want to matter, to lead lives of meaning. Yeah. So you're involved with a group and you're doing something. At the end of the day, you want to feel as if what you do is valuable to the world. It's not just valuable to a bunch of people who are shareholders making money, but it matters to everybody that what you do is positive, it's good, it's inherently good, and that's a very important element that a lot of us. I mean, not that the world is altruistic across the board, but what we're doing is beneficial for the world around us. It's not that we're doing something that's negative. That's a critical thing, because if you're involved in an activity that is essentially negative, you might generate some very negative ideas about yourself over time. Okay, so they talk a lot about, then they talk about reflection and contemplation, and this is a very important part of the process. Reflection, stopping and checking and pausing and evaluating, asking questions like what is happening, why is it happening, what does it mean, and what does it mean for you specifically, and what could you learn from that process. Again, it's a never ending process of going backward and forward, changing over and over again. The problem with reflection and contemplation is the issue of velocity of life, speed of life. That is the challenge you're going to face in any activity, especially in developing your leadership potential, is the continuous assessment required to improve your skills in leadership does require putting aside time for reflection. And some of this reflection is really nothing that you sit and write. It's about simply sitting and thinking and cogitating on what was done and thinking about specific activities or specific things that happened and going through the emotional responses you had to it. I don't know if any of you all do that. Think about an event 10, 15 years ago and go through how you felt and evaluate what could I have done differently and how would I have felt if I behaved in a particular manner, or what kind of go through the thing. It, I guess some people might look at it as looking back and regret, but it's actually to look back to see, evaluate, as a person you were then, the decision that you made at that point in time suited the set of tools you had available then. What would you do now? Think about it from that perspective. All right. Uh, Metacognitive, yes. So this is the part that we talk about. That thinking about thinking. That's what I'm talking about. That's metacognitive behavior. Thinking about what you thought back then. It sounds nonsensical, but try it. Try thinking about something you thought about a long time ago, or something you did a long time ago, and evaluate what you did then in relation to who you are now, decisions that you made back then to now. And I mean, it might bring up feelings of regret and stuff like that, but forget the feelings of regret and work through why do you feel regret? What is so significantly different between then and now that would change your decision making? And you'd see that exercise comes up on something you're going to do in the future for the assessments. All right, think about it from that position. You know, ask the questions: why did this go so well or not well? Why did we get this together? And so this is one of the elements that we also have to pay attention to. Oftentimes, when we are looking at our past, recent past, and as well, we tend to focus on what went wrong, but we also need to pay attention to what goes right, because we need to repeat that as well. So we need to both understand why something may have gone wrong, But more importantly, we have to spend a good bit of time on why did this go so well, so that we can make sure that that can happen the next time. Why did you get an A in this course? What did you do that made this an A? And in another course, you got a D. What was the difference? Why did you get the A? Because if I can repeat what took place to get the A, then it's something that I can get, for all my courses across the board. That's the kind of reflection we're talking about, along with the other one that I said about the meta thinking, metacognitive thinking, thinking about thinking. I know it probably sounds funny, but thinking about thinking is a weird, weird thing to say. All right. But reflection is one of the key parts of the process, because you really have to sit and think about what took part in the past to the future. Why did I behave this way? Why did I say this? Because some of the things we've done in the past really stick with us. And if they stick with you, try going through it and evaluating it from that perspective across the board. All right. So don't get tied up with the process orientation as being a very critical, not one, not it's critical, but a technical thing. It is really is more sitting and thinking about what you've done in terms of your value structure, in terms of the activities you engage in to be ethical, in terms of the activities you do in being inclusive or sometimes failing at being inclusive, as well as the actions that you get involved with to be the other element that we talk about with it is what's the next one? Anybody wants to remind me in the model? What the purpose? Come on, guys, remember everything. All right. So reflection and contemplation, pay attention to all these things because they're critical as part of the process. So again, we've finished looking at a massive outline because this is a long chapter. It was probably one of the longest chapters in the text itself. Um, so there's a lot of slides, a lot of information, and as Vicky says, Victoria said, some of the chapters, some of my slides are a little off from the one that you have. But the idea is, I don't need you to go and memorize and learn these, but I want this to be the start of a process for you to start evaluating things. Because the rest of the presentations now begin to focus on each one of those elements independently. So every chapter presentation is going to further examine the overall nature of the leadership program that we're looking at. And it's going to bring in two versions of it. One straight from the relational leadership program, as well as including an optional look from the DAF perspective, which is more from the position of organizational structure. So we're going to look at it from two elements. That's why we included the DAFT. Okay. All right. Any questions? I know we are approaching 8:30. Candace?
Yes.
No, we are approaching 8:30. No questions?
No
All right.
question, sir. Thank you.
All right. Everybody's okay with it thus far. All right. So next week we don't have a session in terms of presentations. However, if anybody wants to get on to me to ask any questions, especially the two groups that are presenting, feel free to message me and we could have a chat on little one-to-one meetings to help deal with your circumstances or situations or questions. All right. So next set of presentations begin from October 14th, where we have chapters 4 and 5. And then, of course, we continue there on every week with presentations going through until November 11th. Right after that, or from October 14th, we have our midterm evaluations becoming active. That means that is right after, actually, that should change a little bit to the 21st, actually. So it'll be October 21st. So I'll need to give you all some more time here. October 26th. Let's see, could give you all to November 2nd. To get this done. All right, that's sensible. So by that time, November 2nd, we should be kind of wrapping up some more presentations. So you get that out of the way. Uh, we have to meet then after that. Right. So we have November 18th to the 25th to treat with some debate preparations. If we do get a chance when we have some of the shorter presentations go off, we'll probably spend some time putting the initial teams together so we could start teaming up again. All right? Okay. So with that being said, and there are no questions being asked, I will stop the recording and wish you all well for tonight. I'll see you all next week.